Welcome, everyone. My name is Russell Farbiars, and welcome to another edition of Not Minding My Own Business. I am so pleased to be here with my guest today, Jonathan J.D. Del Collo, the Prothonotary of Berks County, Pennsylvania. Welcome, J.D.
Good morning, Russell. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here, J.D. Before we get started, do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about you?
Sure. I'm a lifelong Berks Countyan. I've lived in Bern Township for the last few years. Previously, I lived in the city for most of my life, but I grew up in Mount Penn, and I graduated from Antietam in 1991, and then I went off to college in Washington, DC, graduated with a degree in political science and public administration. I've worked in public service my whole working career. I started in the mayor's office of the city of Reading in 1996. I came to the county in 1999 in the recorder of deeds office. And then I moved to the Prothonotary's office in 2006. And I've been here ever since.
All right.
I was the chief deputy Prothonotary from 2006 to 2016 for 10 years. And then my predecessor retired. I became acting Prothonotary, and then I was elected by the citizens of Berks County in November of 2017 to a 4-year term. And I was happily reelected this past November in 2021, unopposed by the citizens for another 4-year term. So I'm very grateful to the citizens of Berks County for giving me the opportunity. And I think we're doing a great job here. And that's pretty much my life in a microcosm.
Well, thank you, JD, and congratulations again on your reelection. So for any of our listeners who might not be familiar with the term, what exactly is the Prothonotary?
The Prothonotary is a fancy name for really the clerk of the civil and family court. In Berks County and in the structure of government in Pennsylvania, there are several clerks of courts. There is the clerk of courts who just handles criminal matters only. There is the clerk of the orphans court, who also happens to be our register of wills from the way the counties were set up. And the clerk of the orphans court, of course, handles orphans court matters and things like that. And then there's the Prothonotary, who is the clerk of the civil and really family court. It's a fancy name. It's an Old English name. It's composed of really two words, protho, notary. It has its origins in Greek and Latin. Really, protho is, I think, Latin for first, and notary is notary. It goes back, I think, to the Ottoman Empire had Prothonotaries. They were official clerks or notaries that worked for the court, and certified official documents for the empire, and did things like that. And the term was just carried on as the county was founded in 1752 and throughout Pennsylvania. I don't think any other states in the Union have Prothonotaries. In other states, they're called lots of things: clerk of the circuit court, clerk of courts. They're called a lot of things, different titles with the same type of general job. But the Prothonotary really is the clerk of the civil and family court, and we can definitely get into what that actually means as we go through this talk.
Well, why don't we go there? Why don't we talk about what?
So as I said, the Prothonotary does not do anything criminal. We don't file anything that's criminal. We kind of skirt the criminal line because we do file and keep protection from abuse orders. And that kind of borders on criminality, but a protection order in Pennsylvania is considered a civil order. So that gets filed here. But everything else we do is not criminal. We file liens, we file judgments, we file, any type of case you can think of, civil actions, tort claims, slip and falls, credit card. We are a level of the appellate courts. So if we have there's 3 levels of courts in Pennsylvania: the minor courts, which are their magisterial district judges, the Court of Common Pleas, which is our level, and then the appellate courts, the Superior and Commonwealth, and then ultimately the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. Well, we're an appellate arm of the lower courts. If somebody gets a judgment on the lower court level, wants to appeal it, it would come into our court, and it could eventually go all the way up to the Supreme Court, which is kind of rare, but it does happen from time to time. But that's the civil side, liens, judgments. We do federal tax liens. We do a lot of state income tax liens, state unemployment compensation liens, lots of liens and judgments. We file all liens and judgments except mortgage liens. Mortgage liens are filed in the Recorder of Deeds office. But then we have a whole nother side, the family side, which is divorces, custodies. Those are the 2 primary ones. We kind of classify protection from abuse under family. And that's a huge arm of the office. Family cases, with our recent times with COVID and things being crazy, a lot of people are getting divorced. There's a lot of custody actions. It's very, very busy. So we have the whole family side in addition to the whole civil side. So it's very, very involved. And then we have a whole division for basically and I kind of focus on this a lot because I have an excellent staff that is able to do the regular nitty-gritty with the family and the civil. The historical side, our naturalization documents, a lot of our historical records that we keep, those are all here as well. And that's a pretty big part of the job as well. So it's a very big job. As I tell people when they ask me about the office, it's not a sexy office like the sheriff or the district attorney or maybe a county commissioner, but it's a very, very necessary office. If this office is not running efficiently, the courts pretty much cannot function properly, so it's a very necessary office. It's not necessarily a sexy office or a high profile office like the district attorney or like the sheriff, but it is a very, very necessary office.
You're sort of responsible for all the details and the record keeping and the management that keeps the system running, would be my understanding of it.
That's right. Yeah, we keep all the records for the court. So, any order that's been issued, any file that's been filed, it used to be a lot of paper. We are no longer a paper office. We are pretty much a paperless office. Our files are done by e-filing, which was implemented we're coming up on almost 10 years of e-filing.
It's amazing
it really is. It really is. And I think back to how all the sessions of planning and putting that thing together, they were painful, but now these days they're really paying dividends, no doubt about it.
Can you imagine having something like COVID and not having e-filing?
It's awful. And we got a taste of it as well because Philadelphia County and I think Luzerne County, they had catastrophic failures in their systems. I think they were hacked a couple of years ago, because I remember going to our annual conference and their e-filing systems were just totally shut down. And they had to go back to the old way where people had to bring in paper and you had to scan it, and it was a mess. So, I mean, we owe a lot to our IT department because they keep the system very secure.
Right. Now, how many cases on average would you say you process in a year?
Between liens and civil cases, we do about 20,000 cases a year. And that's all inclusive. That's miscellaneous petitions, if and regular civil actions and family actions and liens and judgments. About 20,000, give or take. Starting to go up a little bit. For like the last 4 or 5 years, it was trending down. Usually, the way we chart it is if the economy is pretty good, our filings are lower. If the economy is starting to go bad, or there's a thing like the pandemic or something like that, things start to go up, and we're starting to see the cases inch up. And if there's a financial bubble burst or anything like that that's on the horizon, which I hope there isn't, but if that happens, like in 2008, when the economy just went into the crapper, I mean, our filings are just out the door. Unbelievable. We couldn't believe it. And we're prepared in case something like that. But back in 2008, we didn't have e-filing. Now we have e-filing. And if something like that would come again, I think we could handle it. But it will be interesting to see.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I could definitely see how you would sort of trend with the economic times. But it's also that's an amazing amount of paper, and I guess I say paper in quotation marks at this point, that has to be processed and in a timely fashion. And I'll say your office does do that.
That's our goal. That's our goal. We turn them around fast, which it's a lot easier with the e-filing because, in the past, you'd have to go down to the mailroom and get the mail and bring it up and open it, find out where it's going, and take staples out and make a file and used to have those boxes with the numbers on, and you'd have to peel them off the box and peel them onto the folders and then put the year, and then you entered it all by hand. And I mean, it was a long process. And now that, they get a notification in a queue and a filing pops up, and they're able to bring it up right away, look at it on the screen, make sure everything looks good, and hit accept with one click of their mouse. And it's on the docket. The image is there. Notifications are sent to the parties. If it needs to go to a judge, it's already in the judge's queue. I mean, it's amazing how, and then the file's created. So there is no paper file, of course. The electronic file is created in the structure of our case management system. It's amazing. And it really saves a lot of time. And it enabled us to really make the office a lot more efficient. And we were able to, through attrition, mainly reduce staff and reduce costs to the county and to the taxpayers, which is what we like to do.
That's just amazing to see how many steps you sort of cut out. Now, you mentioned that another part of the job is these historical records. So, tell me a little bit about the historical records that your office has.
Sure. So, the county the county's coming up March 11th, 10 days from now. The county will be 270 years old. 1750, March 11th, 1752, Berks County was founded from parts of Philadelphia and Lancaster counties. They carved out the diamond-shaped county that today we know and love as Berks. I'm the 56th Prothonotary in the history of Berks County, going back to 1752. 1752, there was a gentleman, and back then, we were a brand new county. Counties were created by the state legislature, so that they created Berks, and all the officers of the county at that time. There was a sheriff, there was a prosecutor, wasn't called the district attorney yet, but then there was a gentleman named James Reed, R-E-A-D, and he was appointed as like the first everything. He was like the first Prothonotary, the first register of wills, the first recorder of deeds, the first clerk of courts. Back then, they called it the clerk of the quarter sessions. He was everything. He was one man who did everything. And there was a lot of paper that was written, writs and dockets of cases. And I like to remind people, 1752, we were still a colony of Great Britain. So it's it's really interesting to pull these documents up and see, right at the top of every single document was always, well, back in 1752, George II was the King of Great Britain. So I think he died in 1781 or 71. I'm not sure, 61, I think. And then is when George III came in. It's 81, George III. He was already on the throne. So these documents would say George II, by the grace of God, King of Great Britain, and then the regular business of the document would proceed. And it's hard to believe, we weren't the United States of America. We weren't even the United States, because it was before 1776. So there's a lot of those historical records that exist today, and they're in bad shape. They're really in bad shape. And one of the things I wanted to do when I got in is there's an account, there's a fee that we charge. We're mainly a fee-based office. We do, taxpayers do pretty much compensate myself and the staff. But most of the rest of our expenses are covered by the filing fees that we charge for our filings. There is a filing fee called an automation fee. The legislature, in their infinite wisdom, very good infinite wisdom, about 25 years ago implemented a $5 fee called an automation fee. And the way the law was written was that it was a special $5 on every filing that would go into a special fund for the Prothonotary to use to automate his or her office. Well, my predecessor really didn't use it that much. And we had these old records, just basically rotting away. 250-year-old paper, when you open it up and it's not in a climate controlled environment, it basically, paper slowly decomposes if it's out in the air, and it was basically turning into a black, brown, moldy pile of pulp. And I said, we've got to preserve these. So I started to use the automation fund to have these old records digitized. And as we started to go through them all, just amazing, the writing, there were no, pens back then, quills, dipping them into the inkwell, writing them, probably, no electricity back then. So they had to do it all through, natural light or candlelight if they were working late. And, then they would affix official seals with wax, really official royal type things, because those traditions came over from Great Britain. And it was just a treasure trove of historical documents. And as we started imaging them, it made me feel great because number one, they're imaged, so we have a record of them forever. And number two is some of the really bad ones, we were able to use some archival tape to repair them, or at least hold them together so that they wouldn't decompose any further. So that's good too. Now that they've been imaged, they really don't need to be pulled out again. They can be just packed securely away, just left to the ages, since we have the images and they're very well done as well. One story, if I could tell, is our Ben Franklin bond. So I was down and we have a little, and this because you know the courthouse very well. There's a little sub basement below the Prothonotary's office that we call the dungeon. And there's old books stored down there. We're slowly cleaning it out. There's a lot of old empty file folders and just miscellaneous type things that really have no historical value. But when I assumed office, I went down there and we were starting to dig through some stuff. And I found this bond and somebody had put it in a page protector. And I looked at it, and at the bottom it said, printed by D. Hall, B. Franklin and D. Hall, Philadelphia. And I'm thinking to myself, well, there's only one B. Franklin I knew from Philadelphia around that time, because it was, I think, 1760, Ben Franklin. So I researched it, and here it turns out that Ben Franklin and a gentleman named, I think, David or Daniel Hall had like a printing press, and they made bonds or paper at their little, Ben Franklin, he was like the quintessential Renaissance man. He did everything. Well, they had a little printing press, and they printed these papers, and I guess distributed them to counties or whoever needed them. So I thought that was really, really neat. I mean, to think maybe he didn't touch it or hold it himself, but most likely he did, pulling it off the press and getting it ready to be shipped out or something like that. So we were able to get that preserved because it was in terrible shape. It was in a moldy drawer, and we got it to a conservation center down in Philadelphia, and they fixed it up. They put it in like an acid bath. I said, "You're going to put this into an acid bath? Don't worry, it's an archivally safe procedure." I said, all right, and I knew that I had checked this company out, and I knew that they were legit because a lot of the museums and things like that use them. But when they told me we were going to dip this into an acid bath or some type of a thing, I was like, I don't know about that. But it came out great. We have it here in the office. We bring it out every so often. It's really cool. It was a bond that was issued by a gentleman named John Wummelsdorf, who I was able to determine was like the man that Wummelsdorf Borough to this day in Western Berks County was founded after. So really, really, really cool stuff. A lot of history. Conrad Weiser, everybody knows Conrad Weiser in Berks County. He was the first president judge of Berks County, and there are some of these historical records that are written in his hand, signed with him. They're amazing. They're really, really historically significant for, history people and people that find that interesting, which I do, the history of the county and the courthouse and all that stuff.
That is amazing. I mean, and I told you before we went on the air, I'm a history person. So, all this stuff, we could talk for hours about this.
Oh, it's great. It's really, really cool.
Now, I know one of the things that I've noticed that you've done since you took office is there are these wonderful pictures outside of your office of the old courthouses in Berks County. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the courthouses that you've discovered?
Yeah. So as a little preview, when I came in and I was, would walk around the halls, going to meetings, and we don't have a men's room on this. I'm on the Prothonotary is on the second floor of the courthouse. And anybody who knows the courthouse knows that there is not a restroom on each floor of the building like there is in the services center, which is the newer building attached to the courthouse. If you need to use the restroom in the courthouse, you either have to go to the fourth floor, the seventh floor, or down into the basement where the jail lockup is. There's also little sub ones that are kind of hidden away. But so, going back and forth to the restroom and things like that, I just got tired of looking at plain walls. And I said, wouldn't it be nice to get some historical pictures, maybe of the building of the courthouse or of Berks County's history or something like that. So my office manager and I went to the Berks History Center, and we picked out some images from when this courthouse was built. Now, this courthouse was built in 1931-32. This December, this courthouse will celebrate its 90th birthday. And it's as solid today as it was when it was built. I mean, it is a very solid building.
It's in better shape than the services center.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. I mean, and to think it was built in about maybe 14 months. Amazing. I mean, the work, the way the workers worked back then. But this is really the fourth courthouse that Berks County is at. The one that is here at 6th and Court right now is really the fourth courthouse. When the county was founded in 1752, there was a little log cabin structure, I think right along right at Rose and Washington Streets in Reading, which was a little small building, and that served as the courthouse for about 10 years. And then in 1762, they constructed what a lot of people know as the original courthouse, but it was really the second courthouse. And that sat right at the very center of 5th and Penn Streets. the entrance of it faced south on Fifth. And if you see, if you go to the Berks History Center Museum, which I always put a plug in because I'm on the board of trustees and I love that place. There's a little diorama on the second floor of the Berks History Center of downtown Reading in, I think, the 1770s. It's magnificent. I mean, it shows exactly what the city looked like in 1770. Right there in the middle at Fifth and Penn is the courthouse. It was a magnificent two-story structure, not many rooms. I think one courtroom, one room for James Reed, who was the original everything. And James Reed served really from like 1752 almost to 1780. And then that's when there was officers that started to assume the different positions as the county grew and as the government, expanded its role and just took on its form. And that building stood from 1752 to 1840 at the one at Fifth and Penn, right in the center. I mean, if you drive over Fifth and Penn today, there are still some remains of the foundation of the second courthouse underneath the ground. I have that on pretty good authority. So if they ever do if I ever see them doing any construction work down there at Fifth and Penn and they have that center part open, I'm going down there and I'm going to say, can you see if there's a foundation there? Because I need one of those bricks or something for my office.
So was it in the middle of where the road is now?
Yeah, right at the intersection.
Wow.
And if you've seen old pictures of Reading, which we have a couple hanging here on the floor, there was like a circle, a traffic circle that Fifth and Penn made. And it sat right in the very center. And in old depictions of it, there are some artistic renderings of it. There are some posts that sit outside of it and alongside of it. Now, some people have said, yes, they could have been for horses. I have been told, and I've researched, that those posts were really whipping posts that were used, like if somebody was sentenced, you committed a theft, so your sentence is 30 lashes. Well, they would take the now convicted felon, no longer a defendant, out, tie him to the post and give him 30 lashes. That happened back then in the 1700s. There was also a jail, Berks County Jail, which was at Fifth in Washington, I think on the present site of either the Abraham Lincoln Hotel or the Berkshire Hotel, which was right across the street. Today it's the Center Hispano.
Right.
The old Berkshire Hotel was right across the street. That was like the original where Berks County Jail was back in the 1770s. But 1840, I mean, the county was growing. The little courthouse at Fifth and Penn was just too small, and they constructed the third courthouse on the footprint of the present one at 6th and Penn Streets. Magnificent, again, like a two-story structure. It had the Goddess of Liberty at the very top, a pretty cool building. And they actually added on to that. There's some really nice pictures of that here in the courthouse. If you come and visit us, take a look. They added on to the second courthouse through the decades until around the early 1920s. They were just out of space, and the decision was made that we're going to build. We're going to demolish. There was all different types of locations. The most grand location where they were going to build was over in West Reading. Like if you came over the Penn Street Bridge today, and right as you would go past the on and off ramps for 422, right there as Penn Street would start to go up when you're in West Reading, right at that site, they were planning a magnificent big courthouse with big all the highlights. Well, that fell through, and they said, well, we're just going to build it. We're just going to build it we're going to move temporarily, which they did, to a building at 4th and Court Streets. I think where WEEU is today, but I'm not sure. They moved the entire courthouse out. 1931, they demolished the courthouse in about a month. In May of 1931, they demolished the courthouse, And then they began to construct the building that we're in now in about June of 1931. And it was completed in December of 1932. Amazing. And it's, 18 stories. I think to this day, still the tallest courthouse in Pennsylvania, but I'm not positive on that. And there was plenty of room in 1932 for all the, business of the county. Eventually, we grew more and we needed to construct the services center, which is now attached. But the courthouse, it's a special building, and we have some images in the second floor of the construction of the courthouse, the skeleton, the steel skeleton with two workers. When I saw the original picture, I just saw the steel skeleton. I'm like, oh, that's a great picture. We got to get that. And then we got it blown up and we put up. And then when it was put on the wall, I said, oh my goodness, look. And there's two gentlemen, no harnesses, no restraints or anything. They're just standing on the scaffolding, attaching something or painting something. Amazing. So yeah, we have a lot of historical images of downtown Reading. One of my qualifications was any downtown Reading image, I wanted to make sure a picture of the courthouse was in the image. So all the images of downtown Reading have the courthouse in it. And, it's a tremendously beautiful building. There's so much about it. The limestone that was made to, the Italian architecture. It's an Art Deco building for architecture nuts. I'm still not up on different types of architecture like that, but it's a magnificent building, and it's really a gem in downtown Reading. I mean, I love it. I'm glad my office is here, because if I'd be over in the services center, I wouldn't be as, historically excited when I come to work every morning. But
And
yeah, and this December, it'll be 90 years old, going strong.
what? Wow. Now, has the Prothonotary always been in the site, the space that you're in, or was it ever anywhere else in the building?
Yeah, no, it's always been on the second floor. 1932, when the courthouse opened, we were here, but we were in a little part of what is now the very, very back filing part of the office. That was the Prothonotary's office. In 1932, the sheriff and the recorder of deeds were also on the second floor.
Mhm.
So as the county grew and regulations and stuff came down from the state, and the county had to get bigger, the county government had to get bigger. The sheriff office eventually moved up to the third floor, and the recorder of deeds eventually went down to the first floor of the courthouse, I think, before they built the services center, and then now it's over in the services center. But now we're the entire second floor of the courthouse, but it's always been on the second floor.
Well, very, very interesting. I really appreciate you giving us, the primer here on the history. It's really, really interesting.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad to do it. I love
Yeah.
sharing the Berks County history because it's very fascinating.
So one final question. What got you into, wanting to be the Prothonotary or working in the Prothonotary's office?
Well, like I said, I was always I was always into public service, and when I started my career, I wanted to, be a public servant. I wasn't smart enough to be a doctor. I wasn't smart enough to be an attorney. Even though you and I might say there are some not smart attorneys, but
I was thinking it, but I wasn't going to say it.
most of them are very well educated and very astute in the law. And as I say to my staff, I said, our Berks County bar members and our lawyers are our number one clients. I love our Philadelphia and our Delaware and our Chester and our Lehigh attorneys. But I am not the Lehigh or the Philadelphia or the Chester Prothonotary. I'm the Berks County Prothonotary. So I tell the staff, Berks County attorneys take precedence, and that's what I hope is happening. But I was always involved in public service. It goes back, I have a scrapbook in here. It goes back really to when I was 10 years old. And I wrote a letter to President Reagan, Ronald Reagan, 1983. I didn't think I'd get anything back. I think it was a school project, write a letter to the president, tell him to have a nice day and you hope he's doing well and whatever. Well, a couple months later, I get a letter back from the White House. I open it and it's a letter from President Reagan to me. And I'm like, wow, the president sent me a letter 10 years old. And that just started it for me. I got involved in I got interested in presidential history and United States history, especially, and to this day, I'm still a big fan of the history of the early republic, the revolution. It helps when in doing genealogy, which is another thing I love to do. I found out that I'm descended from a Minuteman and from somebody who came out at the Lexington and Concord call to arms, at the beginning of the Revolution, a direct ancestor. I'm a proud member of the Sons of American Revolution. And I just was involved. I was like, I really like the history of the United States, especially the early history. And it just started from there. I loved history in high school. And in 1989, when President Reagan was coming out of office, there was a bus trip that was going to President George H.W. Bush's inauguration in Washington in January of 1989. And I was, in high school and starting to think about maybe college or whatever. My dad says, would you like to go to that? I said, yeah, I'd love to go to that. And I'd never been really to Washington. And so we went on this bus trip, got to see the inauguration. The only time in my life that I was able to see President Reagan in person. He was a little tiny speck, but at least I saw him and saw the helicopter, Marine One, and the whole pomp and circumstance with the band and the cannons and all that. And I was hooked. And back then, I don't think they do it anymore because after 9/11, a lot of things changed. But back then, whatever state you were from, the senators, the United States senators from that state would have a reception in their office for the constituents of their state after the inauguration was over. So we got word to go to the senators back then were John Hines and Arlen Specter. Well, we kind of flipped a coin and we said, well, let's go to John Hines. Senator John Hines was from Pittsburgh, an heir of the Hines fortune, a very good senator, very well liked, a very good looking man as well. I mean, I and some others believe he might have gone on to become president. Unfortunately, he was tragically killed in a plane crash a few years after that, 1991, I believe. And we went to his office and, it's a senator's office, and he greeted each person as they came in. So my dad and I got to meet him. We got our picture taken with them. And on the way home, my dad said, you think this is something you'd want to, get into, like public service or, government service? And I said, yeah, I think it is. And that started me in college. And then I almost stayed in Washington after college, because Congress and the president and the federal government and all that. And then I took a class on intergovernmental relations with a man named Bernard Ross. He's a late professor from where I went, American University. And I fell in love with local government. And he would always tell me, Dr. Ross would tell me, he's like, local government is the government that is closest to the people, and it's the one that has the most effect on the people's lives. Foreign policy and all these debates that go on in Washington, yeah, they kind of have but the president doesn't pick up your trash, and the Congress doesn't make sure that you have clean roads, when it snows, and the Supreme Court doesn't make sure that your water's running right, and that there's no, that your electricity and all that your services are being delivered. And I said, that is pretty cool. So after I graduated, I made the decision to come back to Reading in Berks County, and that started me in public service. And I've been here ever since. I think it's a very noble profession. I think it's a thankless profession for the most part. People that use the office like yourself and other attorneys, they recognize what we do, and we get a lot of kudos from them, and we really appreciate it. But the average citizenry, it's like we get crapped on a lot. And that we're used to it. The reason is because, this office is like an umpire. And I always tell people we're like an umpire. We're an official. We cannot take either sides. So we have a lot of pro se litigants, and you're familiar with pro se self-represented litigants. And they come in and they're all fired up. I'm going to represent myself, and I don't need an attorney. When in fact, most of them can afford an attorney. They just either don't like them or they don't want to use them because they're cheap. We always tell them, please, 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 please use an attorney, because you're going to save yourself a lot of money in the long run. Please. Oh, no, I can do this myself. And then they expect you to do everything for it. I mean, we're like, well, we're not going to do that. Well, what do you mean? We elected you and we pay your salary and the whole. And I said, listen, I cannot take one side over the other. I said, if I would sit down with you and give you everything you need, yeah, that's what I want. I said, all right, well, how about I do that? And then after you leave, I'm going to call the opposing party and I'm going to say, I gave a half an hour to the other side. I'll give you a half an hour, whatever you need, I'll help you with. And they look at me and they say, well, you can't do that. And I said, well, why not? I just spent a half an hour with you. Why can't I spend a half an hour with them and help them out? And then it starts to click in. Oh, okay. Yeah, I said, we're really just a filing office. I said, I can't help you. I can't assist you. We can maybe lead you or give you some hints, but we can't do it for you. And, we get a lot of people that swear and cuss and they're not happy, and we're used to it. But
It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, but people don't realize that you can't give legal advice, and they don't understand that telling them what to file is legal advice,
right,
or how to do it.
right.
So, but
we know the answers, and we really would love to help them, because sometimes people are very emotional, and especially when it comes to the family cases and stuff. I mean, it's hard. It's hard for us to say, we're not excited and happy to say, no, we can't help you. It pains us a lot of times. Now, every so often you get a real pain in the neck person and you're like, can't help you. And it feels good. But for the most part, it's hard, because some of these people really, they want us to help them, and we just really can't. And because we could be liable, and it could really, there's an ethical canon and standard that we abide by, and we can't go away from that. It's just not right. So
no, absolutely.
I still love it though, and I love coming in and helping out as many people. We get a lot of requests from veterans for copies of their divorce decrees, copies of a custody order, and when you're able to do that for somebody and make their day, it's great. It's a great feeling.
Of course. Well, JD, this has been great. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime. Glad to do it. Being
a guest here today. And this has been another episode of Not Minding My Own Business. And we will see you next time.